In terms of the science of climate change, I think it's fair to say, without being any sort of expert, but a relatively informed observer, that we are approaching a serious tipping point. And I do not say that lightly. It is really clear from the evidence from the UN reports, from other independent science, from a range of universities and other scientific bodies around the world, that the climate faces a tipping point. And that isn't something which is a small tweak or a little change. It's a fundamental change. It means that we're on a path to destruction, essentially, of humanity on this planet. And that is because of the rising proportion of carbon dioxide and other gases in the atmosphere which cause or allow and facilitate climate change. And as humans, we're ultimately responsible for that process. The data is really clear. The number of warm years in the last few years, the amount of carbon dioxide that's been measured since the 1950s, the link with climate change is really clear, and indeed the other gases as well. And where we now sit is on the cusp, on the very edge, on the brink of an abyss, and we have to do something about that. I think it is perfectly reasonable and responsible, given that situation which we now face, which is shown by the melting and the threat of melting of great ice sheets, not just of relatively modest areas of ice, but of the West Antarctic ice sheet, the Greenland ice sheet, which would dramatically increase the sea level around the world and which would lead to large parts of the planet being uninhabitable, including parts of Great Britain, many coastal cities in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and towns next to rivers like in my own constituency of Reading East, both in Reading and Woodley, could be very seriously affected by this level of change. Over many decades, admittedly, but it would mean that we would be saying to our children in our old age, we failed, and we failed very seriously. So in that context, I think it is perfectly reasonable for protesters outside and for us in this House to use the term climate emergency. I think we should not shy away from it, and I hope the Minister, I'm sure he will wish to address this with the level of gravity which this very serious situation demands. So that's my first point, and I'm grateful for colleagues for making those points clearly in support of that and highlighting the particular issues in Brazil with the very great importance of the Amazon and indeed in the other South American countries where it is a huge carbon sink, obviously, and it also is at threat from these dreadfully irresponsible fires which the government of Brazil has so wrongly allowed to take place. My second point, which is on a different note but addresses the first one, is the need for urgent and sustained action. And I believe it is the duty of all governments of whatever political colour around the world to join together and take that action now, and indeed of us as private individuals, of companies, of charities, of schools, whatever human organisation exists. We need to, in some way, change our behaviour, whether that's reducing the amount of meat we eat, driving less, taking a whole series of other steps, cycling rather than driving. There's a series of measures we can all take in our daily lives. And what I would say in terms of the importance of this motion is that we shouldn't shy away, as people in the developed world, from taking a very clear stance with other people in the developing world. However awkward that might seem, and I take the honourable member's points about the need to engage with civil society in Brazil, I think that's absolutely right, but we can do that also by reinforcing the voices in Brazil who are calling for change and who are addressing the deep mistakes of that government. And I do think, given that context, that this motion is absolutely and utterly right. We should take it seriously, and I hope the Minister will address it in his speech, in his words this afternoon. I'm sure he will. He'll want to take that on, I hope. I would urge him to take this very seriously and to leave no stone unturned and to consider this form of action. It is not something we should take lightly, but it is a necessary potential policy in this, given this situation. So I would urge him to address us very seriously and clearly on this matter.